So my background, I did close to 20 years in the Canadian military, and then I got a get out of jail free card in the mid 90s, and I've been doing this since about 2000, 2001. So I've been studying this whole idea of competencies, and particularly the impact that they have on organizational performance and the bottom line. Going back, because I'm old, right? I'm old. Over 30 years, all the way back to my time in the military. It's a fascinating subject, and as Bev mentioned, it's actually fairly new as a discipline. It's only really been studied extensively since the 80s, which makes it kind of new. I want to look at some research findings, get into the why you should be doing this, some of the ROI measures, some of the dollars that can be generated as a result of doing this properly. We're going to focus at the end around the steps around building a proper competency program. And then the exercise that we're going to put you through is kind of the first step, which is identifying what competent even looks like. And writing the performance descriptions and job descriptions around that so that you can develop the competency management system around them. So again, the focus is really on the why, and I'm an evangelist for this stuff. So welcome to my church. This is my thing, and I get all excited and I wave my arms around and I jump up and down. And most people think I'm crazy, but this is what matters. Okay, so the agenda topics for me, pretty simple. Why this matters, why you should care about it, and really understanding the different approaches and the value that you can get out of the way that you do this. And so in terms of the why and a little bit of the how. So first I want to know from your own organizations or your own experience, if you're not in an organization currently, does your organization actually have a competency development strategy, a people development strategy? Anybody? Okay. Okay. So when you say a strategy, tied to specific goals? So current and future skills development tied to organizational strategy for the long term? Okay. Okay. All right. So do you guys have key metrics around competency? Measure them every month? Who's held accountable for it? Both. Okay. That's good, because that's where it should be. Just a quick idea, anybody's organization measure input side as a percentage of payroll? How much are you actually spending on it as a percentage of your payroll? Okay.
Or sometimes when you want to prove a point, you get it out and be like, look, this is what it's costing.
Okay, we're going to look at some of that down and as we go through this, because input side measurements are fairly common and mostly meaningless. Because what really matters is what you're getting out of the money that you're spending. And if you're doing this right, the money that you spend is actually zero, because you make money off of it. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so we're going to look at this kind of stuff. So Bev's gone into exhaustive detail around what it is. I'm going to spend more time on why it matters, and why you should care about it. When we talk about competency, as Bev mentioned, we're talking about the application of your skills, the application of your acquired skills and knowledge to accomplish specific things in specific contexts with specific results. And that's how you define these things. One of the problems in our business is that when we talk about competency, you get three different consultants standing up at the front of the room. We'll all say competency and we all mean something else. So we're going to focus. We're lucky. We actually agree on what we're talking about. And so we're going to stick to that. Normally, when we talk about competency programs and the things that people are doing, I'm going to guess the vast majority of what people are doing is based on specific task-based stuff, how to do specific things, specific procedures, that sort of learning. Am I in the ballpark? Okay, that's important, but it's not the most important. And the real ROI comes from some of the other stuff that most organizations don't do. These underlying foundation skills, foundation competencies, and Bev got into that when she was talking about, like, what is it that makes you a good leader? What are the specific things that you are doing, and what do those behaviors look like? Those are where you actually make your money out of competency development. And so whether you're looking at essential skills, and I'm talking beyond the literacy stuff, there's that whole other piece of the Essential Skills program. Everybody familiar with the Essential Skills program? Canadian Essential Skills? All right, there's, what, 7, 8 of them, I think? Anyway, but it covers, your basic reading, writing, and arithmetic, but it also covers things like computer literacy and digital skills, critical thinking and problem-solving skills, continuous learning skills, collaboration skills. Those are the ones that are a lot harder to measure, and those are actually the ones that are pretty important. The OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, talks about 21st century skills, those skills and competencies that allow you to be, continue to be viable in a changing economy. And that's really about adapting to change and being able to think beyond your current situation to the future and deal with uncertainty and ambiguity. Those skills are what separate us from the robots and the computers. That's the only thing we've got left that makes us valuable on this planet, is our ability to think in those kinds of abstracts. We can still do it better than computers can, for now. So that's your competitive advantage. It's also the competitive advantage of your organization if you're focused on developing them. That goes way beyond basic compliance training and basic stuff. So quick, I'm going to show you this, and hopefully you can read that. But everybody familiar with the TheDreyfus Scale? Everybody ever heard of a TheDreyfus Scale? Okay. For competency geeks like me, the TheDreyfus is it's everybody's seen one. Whether you've heard it or called it a TheDreyfus Scale or not, everybody's seen one. This is that, 5 layers from I know nothing to I'm an expert, and every step in between. Okay? So if you look at this going from novice to expert, and I'll read this because you probably can't, because I'm guilty of death by PowerPoint here. Okay, I've written a whole pile of stuff on a slide that no one can read. I'll get you copies of the slides. You don't have to copy any of this down. Okay, let's see if I can even read it. I can probably read it off of here better. So if you're at a novice level, you're doing things, knowledge is just, it's a thing, but it has no context. You're doing things according to a rigid set of taught rules and plans. So you have the checklist, you follow the checklist, you do what it says in the checklist, and if it's not in the checklist, you don't do it. That's what novices do, okay? Advanced beginners get some guidelines and a little bit of room to work around the edges around this stuff. When you're competent, now you can deal with other situations and make some decisions and do some conscious decision making, but you're still dealing with standardized and routine procedures. At a proficient level, now you're deciding not only how to do it, but whether to do it at all. This is where professionalism begins, is at level 4. Okay? So the question is, in your organization, Are you focused on training to have a company full of novices, or do you want a company full of competent or proficient people? Because that changes the complexion of the kind of training and development and competency development you do, and it changes the ROI. Okay? Most organizations at the top level, when you talk to senior executives, they don't want a company of rookies. Yet their whole organizational structure and the way they handle human capital within the organization is built around the idea that everybody's an idiot. And this is wrong, because people aren't idiots. You know, we've got the most highest educated population, one of the highest educated populations on the planet. Gallup, who Bev mentioned, the Gallup organization, they do a study every year around employee engagement. And in the US, something like 70% of employees really don't care about the work they're doing or the company they're doing it for. So they're either disengaged or actively disengaged, which means they're actually sabotaging their own company. And it's close to 70%. That's costing the economy billions and billions and billions of dollars in productivity every year. And when you cross-reference that information against age and education, guess what? The most disengaged people are the young people with the highest education. Why do you reckon that is? Why do you suppose that is? Well, it's that, but it's also they have brains the size of a small planet, and we put them in a job where we put them in a little box and say, just do this, don't use your head.
Underdeveloped was the next part.
Yeah.
But I think the fact of careerism and the mindset around that,
Mhm.
like people don't want to work in the same place for 15, 20 years. They want to move their career through several places.
And good organizations recognize that.
Yeah.
And provide that opportunity and grow people. I always talk about the idea of latent skill, right? We have this habit in organizations to put people in little boxes and say that's who you are. And the reality is that nobody is their job description. Everybody comes to work with a whole pile of talents that have nothing to do with their job description. And if organizations could take advantage of that, you could get, literally, using latent skill that's already wandering around in the building, you could get, I don't know, twice as much done without adding any people, because you're using the skills that are available to you. So competency management in an organization in terms of ROI is about finding out about those latent skills and using them, and having a flexible organization that can take advantage of all of the skills that people have, applied in really new and creative ways, so they're continuously learning and growing, and not leaving them in little boxes. And you don't have to pay any more for that. That's the cool thing. It's a secret. But you don't have to pay people more for coming to work and using all of their skills. In fact, they're happier to do that. So it really comes down to an understanding of why you're in business at all, why your organization exists at all. Okay? Everybody here heard of Peter Drucker? Drucker? Some yes, some no? Okay. For those of us in the consulting game, Drucker's like Yoda. Okay? He's this old guy, he's more than old, he's dead now, but he was this guru of management. He had this stuff figured out long before I was born, and I'm old. Okay? Drucker was talking about knowledge workers and a knowledge economy in 1969. Like, I was in grade 1 then. Okay? So Peter Drucker, something like close to 70 years ago, said that the purpose of a business, and you can substitute organization for business, if you like. In fact, Drucker spent the last 20 years of his working life focused entirely on the nonprofit sector and nonprofit leadership because he believed that that was where all the value came in society, was out of the nonprofit sector. They could do things that government was unable to do and business didn't want to do, and real valuable stuff. So anyway, but the whole reason for existence of an organization is to create and keep a customer. And if you want, you can take that and extend it to say the reason, what I always call Drucker's prime directive. Okay, the fundamental task of an organization is the continuous creation and delivery of value in the eyes of its customer, whatever that is. Okay? That's why organizations exist. That's what it's all about. So how do you do that? What does that look like within your organization? Who's responsible for delivering value to your customer in most organizations? Who is that? Generally speaking. Who deals with your customer? Usually the lowest paid, least trained, least appreciated people in your business. And they're the ones that are the face of the franchise. They're the ones that deliver value. My brother works for Toyota. The people that matter are the people that actually build the cars. Because nobody cares what decisions the executives make. They only care if the car works. If it works the way it's supposed to, if it's safe, if it's reliable, and all of that other stuff. And that happens at the shop floor level. That's where the money is made for an organization. So we talk about organizations around these three circles. Achieving the task being the most important. If you're a leader in an organization and you don't have a job description, this is your job description. Okay? Achieve the task, build and maintain the team, and develop the individuals. Achieving the task is about delivering value and doing that as efficiently and as effectively as you can for your client, for your customer. And that rests on a foundation of individual and collective competency. You don't have the people, then achieving the task never happens. If you look and focus on the bottom two pieces as an organizational imperative, achieving the task of delivering value becomes automatic. And management doesn't have to worry about it because now they can worry about strategic things, which is what management is supposed to be worried about, and looking further down the road and letting delivery of value in the present happen at the lowest level possible in the organization with people who are empowered to do that. Okay? Before I get to that, I just want to quickly, okay, if anybody's interested, I'll give you a card, shoot me an email. I'll send you a link to a really cool article. There's a guy in Toronto, Alex Usher, writes a blog called Higher Education Strategies. One thought to start your day. It's really focused on the post-secondary world, but I read it and most competency geeks read it because we don't always agree with Alex, but he always makes us think. And he had an article he wrote a year or so ago, and he talked about the need for a Nordstrom philologist. Okay? And so this is the skill set that's necessary for survival in a changing economy after the robots have taken over. Okay? So Nordstrom, everybody familiar with Nordstrom? Right? High-end department store. Nordstrom employees are empowered to work on behalf of the customer. They have incredible customer service ethic. It's an incredible organization. A philologist or philology goes to the heart and the root of Western education. So it's in the DNA of virtually every social and natural science. It's about at its core, it was about taking ancient documents, translating them, and making sense out of them. So learning today from what's happened before and making these weird connections between disparate pieces of knowledge. So a Nordstrom philologist is somebody with an incredible customer service ethic to serve the customer, to provide value for the customer, and to work in that in ambiguity with the mental gymnastics capability of a philologist. And if you can do that, you will never be out of a job, even after the robots take over. Okay? So organizations that think that way can stay relevant because they can constantly morph and change as the circumstances change. And there's real value in this, okay? A few years ago, Business Development Bank of Canada did a survey, small businesses, but you can generalize the results across the entire economy. High growth strategies, thousands of companies. What are the strategies that generate significant growth? The second biggest strategy was build your talent pool, develop your people. Interestingly, the first one was look after your customer. Okay? Building people is absolutely critical if you want to build your business. Okay? And there's all kinds of other data that confirms this. Association for Talent Development, the artist previously known as the American Society for Training and Development, does a survey every year, the State of the Industry Report. I've been reading these things going back to the early 2000s. Every year says the same thing, that companies that invest more in developing their people outperform other companies in their market that don't. And they do this, measuring it as a percentage of payroll. And the cutoff line seems to be at about 2%. So investment of 2% of payroll generates a significant, like an almost logarithmic improvement in business results. Most companies in Canada are less than 1%. And so, think about that. All right. Some industry-specific examples. This is basic training, basic literacy training. Okay. The Canadian Apprenticeship Forum said $3, a little over $3 return to the employer for every dollar invested in making sure apprentices could read, do basic math. Right. This is basic reading and writing and arithmetic. So for every dollar they spend making sure that their lowest level, entry level employees have these skills, they get $3 back in quality and productivity and safety improvements. Those are real numbers. BuildForce did the same thing and found that it could be north of $25. It's actually $26.34 for every dollar invested. Now, if I came to you as an investment counselor and I said, you can get 2,500% return on your investment, would you do it? It's a no-brainer, right? And yet people don't. And this is the lowest level of skills upgrading. Right? This is basic essential skills. One of my clients, Wayward Steel, they do a lot of work up here, based out of Edmonton. They had a series of horrific accidents about a little over 5 years ago. And they decided to go back and focus on doing things right. So they threw out their safety program and started focusing on competency at the front line. Okay? Since then, 5 million person hours without a lost time accident in an industry that's lucky to go a month without putting someone in the hospital. Right? Over $1.5 million a year in direct cost savings in terms of quality, productivity, lower workers' comp rates, et cetera, et cetera. These are real numbers, okay? Anybody's interested, you can get this report from the Canada West Foundation, or again, just shoot me an email, I'll send you a copy. In that same report, we talk about Canadian Natural, another company that everybody should be familiar with up here. They're both a joint integrity management program, which is about bolting up flanges on connections between pipes in refineries and upgraders. That's not a high-level skill. That's something you would expect a pipe fitter or a millwright to be able to do. They're all certified. But they went and put together a one-day program to make sure that people could do this properly before they started maintenance. Since then, over 40,000 flanges without a leak or a fire. Okay, 30% reduction in their maintenance costs. They've actually doubled their refining and upgrading capacity with the same maintenance force. And it's like literally millions of dollars in cost savings just by making sure that people know how to use a torque wrench and verifying that they're following a process for doing that. So this is real money, right? These are real dollars. We're talking millions of dollars in ROI. And again, this is at the lowest level of basic skills. Simple, task-based stuff. So if you want to grow your business, you have to start by growing your people. That's the bottom line. This is not a cost, this is an investment. And if you do it right, the ROI is huge. But no one does it. Or they do it minimally, okay? And the numbers, the ROI on this stuff isn't new. I mean, we've known about this for decades. Especially me, because I know. Okay, so, but more companies aren't doing it. It's a cost, it's not an investment, okay? And even the training that is happening tends to be focused on basic procedural technical stuff, not higher level competencies.
The question, Jeff, of the companies feel it's not their cost, this is something the school system should be doing, the government should be paying for, that type of thing? Is it something individuals should be taking care of? Or is it the fact that the companies don't see return on investment?
There's a huge return on investment. I would suggest there's a number of different reasons, and there's lots of cop-outs. I shouldn't do what the schools should do. Yes, that's true, but the schools from yesterday can't fix today's problems. And you have a workforce that you've got now that is it may have had all the skills it needed for yesterday's jobs. But the jobs are changing and the world is changing. So continual investment in those skills is critical. Yeah, companies don't see that there's a need for it. They don't want to invest in it. They see it as a cost. But there's, I'd suggest this is that same quarter-to-quarter short-term thinking that has infected all organizations. So despite all of the data, there are still hundreds, thousands of organizations that still live in the late 19th, early 20th century. They're in the dark ages on this stuff. Okay? The science is clear. But we don't like science in North America anymore. We've given up on science. It's fake news. Okay? Anybody here ever heard of Douglas McGregor? No? Okay. Douglas McGregor wrote a book in 1960. He's a prof at MIT. Wrote a book in 1960 called The Human Side of Enterprise. Okay, so this is not new. It's older than I am. Okay, and he talked about Theory X and Theory Y management. Everybody ever heard of that? Okay, so you may not have heard of McGregor, but you've heard of that. So basically, for anybody who hasn't, Theory X versus Theory Y, two different models of thinking about organizations and thinking about people. Theory X says, basically, we'll summarize, people are cows and cattle, and the only reason that they work is because we kick them. Theory Y says that people want to grow and live and contribute and feel value in the work and in what they do and be valued for that. Okay? Basically, I'm paraphrasing. It's a thick book, but I'll paraphrase. Okay? And so this is your classic Theory X manager. Excellent. And no one wants to be that guy, right? And we ask managers, and we present them with theory X, theory Y. Everybody's theory Y. And then if you carry on that conversation, they'll go, yeah, but you know, those idiots that work for me, if we didn't kick them and drive them, nothing would get done. Which would be funny if it wasn't so tragic, right? People live up to your expectations. So most organizations tend to live in this theory Y mentality, which is what drives to the novice and advanced beginner level of people development in the Dreyfus Scale. So it's all linked together. Okay. Organizationally, again, quick, round the room. You guys live and work in theory X companies or theory Y companies, predominantly? Y? Okay. Yeah. Wow. Was X?
I'd say a combination of both.
Yeah.
Hopeful BY with certain actions would dictate that it's X.
Okay. Yeah. A little bit of both? Okay. See, and I mean, I came out of the military. The military is supposed to be the most rigid, structured, everything. And in fact, it isn't. There's a hierarchy, there's ranks, and there's all that. But the military, particularly the Canadian military, has to exist as a theory Y organization with shared leadership and a spread of responsibility, because we don't have enough people to have a rigid hierarchy. So we got to let people do their thing. So we wind up with multidisciplinary shared leadership across the organization, and that's how we manage to get things done without actually having the resources to do any of it. Right? I was on a deployment years ago, quick war story, okay. Covert counter-narcotics operation along the Mexican border, which is not someplace you'd expect to find a Canadian military unit from Bagotville, Quebec. But anyway, 2.5 months in the desert along the Mexican border coming out of Baja, and we were covert in the desert with 12 guys. They finally replaced us with a Marine Corps unit that brought 75 guys to do the same job, and the Marines travel light. If it had been the US Air Force that had come in to replace us, they'd have had a convoy a mile long. We did it for 2.5 months with 12 people because we run a theory Y organization in the military with shared leadership, shared responsibility, and real competency development. That's the ROI of competency. Okay? Yes? Depends. It depends. And that's not a cop-out, right? It depends on the union, and it depends on the management. Inevitably, what we find is that companies get the labor relations they deserve. So if you find a really militant union environment, which is really like this, if you trace back over time, you will find a series of events that created that environment, and they were driven by management generally. And I say generally, not always. So it is possible to have a very, very cooperative environment in a unionized plant, because I've seen it. John Deere out of Moline in Indiana, where they make the combine harvesters, the union basically runs the plant. Okay. It wasn't Suncor at the time. I think it was Petro-Canada back then. But Sarnia and the petrochemical operations, they basically had no management in the plants. It was frontline workers making all the decisions at the union level. It doesn't exist anymore. But that wasn't all that long ago, right? So it's possible to do this and have that kind of really cooperative arrangement, cooperative environment. Trying to reverse a trend takes time, right? And it's way easier just to keep banging people's heads against the wall. It's just, I think that's why it happens. because changing a culture is very, very difficult, but it is possible. Okay, so we don't want to be that guy. All right. So you guys are all prevailing. You say you're all in theory, mostly in theory Y companies, which is great. So it's not just that you're doing training and that you're developing people and that you care about people. It's how you do it. It's where you're focusing that effort that matters. So I'll tell another quick story. I've got copies of this I can send people as well if they're interested. It's a Harvard Business Review article called The Great Training Robbery. Training in North America is about a $170 billion a year industry, corporate training, either internal or external. Like, it's a lot of money. And some estimates put it at more than 70% of it. You might as well go outside and have, make a bonfire with the money for the amount of actual impact it's having on the businesses. And yet we know if you do it right, it's a 25 to 1 ROI. So what's happening? And so the interesting thing here is some studies that have been done around training effectiveness, and there's a few of them. We know that most organizations, and I suspect yours are the same, spend most of your money on the actual training event itself, and that's what you track. It's a fair statement? So hours spent in the classroom, salaries of the training department, yada, 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 okay? And yet we know that things that you do at the management level to chum the water ahead of training will generate 26% of the effectiveness in terms of impact on the business of the training event when it happens. And the follow-up that happens, the post-learning, back on the job, mentoring and coaching and support from management and changes in the in process and culture is 50% of the effectiveness of your training. And yet 85% of where companies spend their money is on the events themselves, which only represents roughly a quarter of the effectiveness of the training. It's not wrong to spend your money there, but it's not the most effective place to spend it. Okay? So that's why there's your 70% waste. Because most of the money is being spent on the 25% that doesn't matter, or matters the least. Okay? So the 50% is only getting about 5% of the money. This is numbers that managers need to understand. Okay? So we've already talked about that one. Okay? So it's how you do it, what you do it, and where you're focused. Okay? That's critical. So I'm running out of time. So the whole thing, no one wants to be stupid, right? Anybody here want to be stupid? Okay, good. Assuming we don't want to be stupid, how do we do this? Where do we start? How do we spend our limited resources to get the best bang for the buck in terms of growing our organizations? Okay. So, first question. Currently, this is just, again, quick question. What are you guys doing now to grow people? Where's your spend now? Anybody? Is it on the procedural stuff, the safety training that you have to do because the government told you had to do it? Is it on basic how to do things, follow the rules kind of training, or is it focused on something else or a mix? Okay. Okay. You're in the hospitality industry, right? Yeah. Nordstrom philologists at work. Anybody else?
I think for us, it's again that idea of skills building to move people within the company that wants to move. Because I think what Ben was talking about, where taking the idea that not everyone wants to move. Some people just want to have their job.
Yep.
And to keep those people happy that love their job, and just giving them more skills and more knowledge to do a better job of their job, and then again rewarding them with benefits and not having to focus on moving people, but just continue to build skills.
Yeah, I used to work, again, quick, running out of time, but it's a quick study on exactly this. In the military, when I was an officer cadet many years ago, I ran into a guy named Ed Carberry. And Ed, if you'll pardon the expression, he looked like an unmade bed. He was a corporal. He'd been a corporal forever. He worked strictly midnight shifts on a radar site in the middle of Labrador. Okay, this is his, and he'd always worked on radar sites, and he'd always worked straight beds. Ed was the, you look at Ed and you go, there's no way this guy can or should be in the military. And he was fantastic at his job. Just how he kept it. And he kept him in the corner. He did, and you know, because someone has to work midnight shifts. Someone has to not, you know, deal with anybody. And he was perfect at it. Okay. He had a brother named Ed. There's no lie. No, Ed, two Ed Carberrys. I ran into his brother sometime later because they told me I was in North Bay working in the NORAD region, and they said, "Oh, you're going to be working with Ed Carberry tonight." And I'm thinking, really? They got him out of the radar? How did? And this guy shows up, and he's a warrant officer, and he's clean as a whistle and pressed and clean. And this is Ed's brother, Ed. Edward and Edwin. Two guys from one of the villages, one of the fishing villages in Newfoundland, and they weren't particularly creative, I guess, in terms of naming people. In the military, they were known as Old Ed. That was the guy I ran into first on the radar site, and Young Ed, his little brother, who was this super keener. Exact opposites. Both really, really good at what they did, and growing in different directions. Okay, so it's exactly what you're talking about. Old Ed you kept building and growing him in that one little role where he was happy and comfortable, and he was happy as a clam doing it. Okay. Young Ed, not so much. Okay. So the second question then is your competency development, is it task and compliance based, which is sort of what I asked already, or is it something else? And the difference is, you know, if you think about it, it's what kind of an organization do you want? What are you aspiring to as an organization? So, since we're in Canada, do you want an organization that's like this, with little static people that move up and down in straight lines and can only do what the controls will let them do? Or do you want this fluid, dynamic, rapidly changing, adapting, and winning organization, and it really doesn't matter what the other guys do because you can beat them anyway? What kind of organization do you want? Because you can't get to that if your organization is structured and growing people as though they were Coleco tabletop hockey players. Okay. So we talk about a hierarchy on this stuff, a 5-level hierarchy. It's based on a capacity maturity model, level 1 through 5. And if you look at this, level 1 is really ad hoc. A lot of companies are down there. Some are at level 2, where it's still very task-focused training and development. You move up to level 3, you're starting to look at actual competencies now instead of just tasks, all the way up to level 5. Wayward, the company I mentioned, that came in after they've been doing this for 5 years, working their way along this paradigm of creating a learning organization. Where do you reckon they were after 5 years on this 5-point scale? Yeah, they're still at level 2 because it's a long process. Okay. Most companies never get beyond level 2. And yet, the real performance gains, the real productivity gains happen when you start getting into level 3. So the steps, how do you do it? We're going to talk about now. How do we do this, okay? Since I'm in the military and we like simple things, and no one in the military can count higher than 3 anyway. Serious. It's 3 men in a section, 3 sections in a platoon, 3, and all we go, right? So 3 is good. Identify, quantify, rectify. Okay? So we identify who the top performers are. We look at that. We identify what those skill sets are. We identify what it is that makes them top performers. Because we want to have a team full of Sidney Crosbys, right? No one wants a team of fourth-line plugs. So figure out what that are, and then figure out what those skills are that make them the top performers. And the hint here is it probably isn't technical skill. It's the underlying competencies, the soft skills, which are hard to learn and hard to quantify, but that's what makes them the best. It's not always that they've got the hardest slap shot. Okay? And those 21st century meta skills are what matter. So then we get into quantifying. So identify who they are, quantify it, quantify those skills that they have, and then measure the rest of the organization against them and figure out where the gaps are. Okay? And that takes some effort too. So you need to get the frontline people and the frontline leadership involved in it, because this is a development program, not a culling exercise to see who we're going to kick out, right? Sometimes helpful to have outsiders assist you in this, but it has to be a management-driven, leaders-driven paradigm. So we quantify, identify the gaps, and then we rectify. And rectifying is specific training and learning to close gaps that are critical to the organization. Technical skills, departmental level skills, but also these cross-functional core competencies that Bev talked about that are critical throughout the organization. This is how you get your Nordstrom philologists, right? And so how do you do that? We think, we being my company, we believe the way to do this is, or should be, first and foremost, internal development. Do the training inside the company, mentoring and coaching. Use the people with the skills to teach the people that don't. Okay? The same kind of approach you'd take in an apprenticeship program. Okay? Why? Why is doing it internally better than hiring somebody like me to come in and teach it? Not that I mind if anybody wants to hire me to come in and teach, but seriously, why would you want to do this internally? It is, if you do it right, it doesn't cost anything.
You're mentoring, it's on the job mentoring. So that's a benefit because it's you see the person that has the results that they are training you.
Yeah.
It's ongoing.
Yeah, it never stops. It's a continuum, right? So if you do it internally, the first reason is, okay, it values the skills of your existing workforce. It tells people that they're useful and valuable, and you're emphasizing the value of the skills that they bring. It builds internal capacity to keep learning, right? So it's not an outside event. It's now culturally part of the way we do things around here, which is part of changing cultures towards continuous development. Okay? So that's critical, right? It goes back to this. You know, Theory Y Applied says you value, honor the skills of the people you've got. Okay, so find the people with the skills. Find in your exercise. identify the people with the highest skill, and then invest in training them on how to impart those skills into other people, mentoring and coaching skills. So you can hire an expert from outside to teach your people how to do that, but the actual hands-on delivery of skills development and competency development should happen internally. Okay? Continual on-job learning and competency development. Okay? And the cool thing is the gurus can be from anywhere in the hierarchy. Right? The janitor can teach the CEO if the janitor has skills that the CEO needs to learn, and vice versa. And with technology now, instead of a one-to-one relationship, you can have a many-to-many mentoring relationship across the entire organization because you can be present even though you're not there. Okay? And then use the same sort of growth and continuous growth and development and mentoring that happens in a good apprenticeship. Okay? And if you use internal people and you do it right, we said it actually costs you nothing and in fact will make you money. Okay? Once you get the basic technical skills out of the way, the next step is to develop those higher level cognitive meta competencies to deliver the kind of active thinking, finding new and better ways to do things and serve the customer and make that a continuous cycle. Okay? Use collective learning. Problems on the job become learning opportunities. Problems that surface in the day-to-day become exercises in collective problem solving and group learning if you treat them that way. Okay? There's no shortages of ways and activities and incidences in every organization that can be turned into learning events on the fly if the organization is looking for them and is trained to look for them. So you need to train your frontline leaders to constantly do this and think this way. Right? As senior managers, you have to act and think this way as well, and it's hard. Okay? It's a long trip. You have to do it iteratively, but you follow the same plan, do, check, act approach that you would on any development project. So it's a constant cycle of continuously upgrading and learning. Okay? And when you do that, the results come. We know the results come. 2,500%. 25 to 1, just on basic literacy. Okay, so the outcomes for your organization. What do you get when you do this? Oops. Well, we'll start with you. You get the agile, adaptable workforce. You get a company that operates like the immune system. It can fix things threats that it's already seen, and it can react to threats that it's never seen before. And it does it autonomously, on its own, on the fly. That's a really cool way to work. You get whole person engagement, you have a much larger skills pool that you can work from in your organization, and ultimately you get happier customers and an improved bottom line, whether you're in the profit or nonprofit world. Right? Even the nonprofit world has to go convince people to give them money. And it's becoming more and more results-based. The funders want to see the evidence of results now, more so than they ever have in the past, particularly in this province, particularly in this economy. The employee gets greater job security because the company's still going to be around because it's able to adapt and react and better at pleasing its customer. They actually enjoy coming to work in the morning, which is fun. And greater job satisfaction. They're engaged and they get meaning out of the work they do. Ultimately, what it means is more of this for everybody. And that's a good thing. Hard to see any downside in that, okay? It's win-win-win. Your customers win, your employees win, your organization wins. Okay? Greater value for all. Okay? So I'm going to stop now because it's 5 after 11.
So if you want to maybe give everybody an understanding about what the case
Yep, that's what we're going to do now.
Then let them take
Yeah.
their break so they can take
So I'm going to stop. I got one more thing to say, and then Bev, you can come on up and we'll introduce the case study to them. Okay. So I'll leave you with another quote from Yoda. Not that Yoda, my Yoda. Drucker. Okay. My Yoda said that knowledge has to be improved, challenged, and increased constantly, or it vanishes. And we're seeing evidence of that out of those Gallup poll surveys and employee engagement with people who are well educated in the US. Okay. So what kind of an organization do you want? What kind of an organization are you growing? And how are you going about doing it? Standing still is going backwards in this economy. We need to create that adaptive, agile, 21st century organization that's focused on competency and continuous growth. That's it. Well, thanks. Like I said, you guys, you've got my contact information. If you want any more information on any of this stuff, just give me a shout. I'd be glad to send you stuff, or I can talk your ear off for hours.